Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy, I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you all doing as we totally descend into fascism now? Hey, here's a question for you listeners. Our neighbors, right across from us, from our apartment, their dog was out on their porch. I don't know, what do you call the thing that's balcony? That's the name, balcony. So their dog's out on their balcony, all their lights are off, and while we're eating dinner tonight, the dog's just barking. I would say 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Dog stopped now, but we got worried, me and my dear Naomi, that something bad had happened to our neighbors. And I got a question, what do you do in those instances, right? I don't think even before society at large recognized that policing in America was corrupt. I don't even think before that cultural moment I would have called the cops. But certainly not now. Certainly not call the cops and have them barge in and shoot our neighbors and their dog. So what do you do? That's where I'm at right now. Where are you at? Hey, this is a great episode. This is Dave Hill. If you don't know who Dave is, he's been on the show before. Well, let me read you his bio. Originally from Hot Springs, Arkansas, writer Dave Hill was raised in a family of carnies, gamblers, hell-raisers, and storytellers. He spent over a decade traveling the United States and Canada as a union organizer before settling down in Brooklyn, New York with his wife and 3 children. He was a regular contributor to Grantland and a writer for the UCB Theater in New York City, and his work has been featured on This American Life, in New York Magazine, The New Yorker, The New York Times, GQ, McSweeney's, and many more. David's first book, The Vapors, a hybrid memoir history of Hot Springs, was just published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, and I can't recommend it more. I am glad I get to call Dave a pal. I always pause for a second when I say, I'm like, for some reason in my brain, I have to categorize my friendships exactly. And I would like to be better friends with Dave. But I think at the moment we are pals. But I'm a fan of his writing too. And he's a smart guy. He's lived many lives. And listen to his previous episodes of Beginnings. And this one we get into, because he had just written a book kind of about the history of where he grew up, I didn't want to make him have to regurgitate all that information again. So we talk about it a little bit just to kind of set up the episode. But then we kind of get into, I thought it was very interesting, this idea of like, what do you do in this political moment when your dreams are to create art, yet the political moment is asking for activists and union organizers and things like that. And in general, just the existential struggle of, coming to accept what your dreams and desires are. And I thought it was very interesting. Dave was pretty open about talking about that kind of stuff. And so I thought we got into some good things. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And like I said, I can't recommend Dave's book enough. Buy The Vapors. Go to, what's the place that I found it? Bookshop.org. That's where I'm buying a lot of my books now. So I don't put more filthy lucre in Jeff Bezos's disgusting slime-lined pockets. Anyway, by the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you want to check out other episodes, I've been doing this for over 10 years. I've talked to, hundreds of actors and comedians and writers. If you're here because Dave's a writer and you want to listen to other episodes with writers, oh God, who's been on the show before? Damon Lindelof, Chuck Klosterman, Ben Marcus, Heidi Julavitz, Helen DeWitt, Rick Moody, John Ronson, Simon Critchley, Harry Matthews, Sam Lipsyte, Mike Sachs. Wow, that's a lot of straight-up authors and, tons of writers from your favorite TV shows, including everything from The Good Place to Game of Thrones to Better Call Saul, and many, many others. Lodge 49. I talked to the creator of that. That was great. Anyway, enough of this. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and lots of other places. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman, and great episodes coming up. I am absolutely psyched. Who's coming up? I just talked to Owen Pallett, wonderful musician you might know from Arcade Fire and from his own stuff. Final Fantasy was his band, and under his own name. Mac McCon from Superchunk. Just some great episodes coming up, so stay tuned. But for now, let's talk to Dave. Timers Club, along with Naomi and Joe Firestone and a handful of other people. Must be a huge honor for you, Dave.
It really is. I mean, that's a good list of people that you have there. I don't know that I should be in their company.
No, definitely you should. I'm a fan of your writing too. It's not just that I like you as a person, but I am a fan of your writing, and I read your newsletter every time you send one, and when I found out I could pre-order your book, I immediately went and pre-ordered it.
Well, thank you.
So I'm very excited to I've been excited to read The Vapors for years now. So
it's taken a lot longer to come out than I originally thought it would. This
is your first book?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious because I read in one of your newsletters how that it went through this whole process. One of the reasons I'm scared to write a book is that you had to kind of rewrite it. You had this idea for it, and that was I don't know. Do you want to describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the story I told in the newsletter was that I wrote the first draft, and pretty much like every stylistic choice that I made, the editor was unhappy with, and for good reason too. But I so desperately wanted to write it's nonfiction, and I wanted to write one of these sort of like, literary nonfiction books that reads like a novel that everybody, those are the kind of books I like to read. So I wanted to write that kind of book. And I think in trying so hard to write something that felt like a novel, I really threw the baby out with the bathwater. I spent so much time kind of tracking down really interesting scenes that the first draft of the book was really, that's all it was scenes. I even told the editor, I had just written a screenplay before I started writing this book. And, when you're writing a screenplay, how you kind of outline it all out with the cards, and it's like the A plot to be. I had outlined this book the same way. I thought about it in terms of scenes and character arcs and things like that. And so in my research, I just looked for like these kinds of vivid, evocative scenes that I could then write in the book. It's not like a novel. I can't just make shit up, right? So I had to dig hard to find good stuff that I thought could work as scenes. Anyway, the first draft ended up feeling more like a string of vignettes. You know what I mean? There wasn't so much a story. It was just like jumping from scene to scene to scene. And so I had to go back and start over and remember that there's actually a lot of history and a lot of information that needs to get conveyed here, not just these but the good news is that in screwing it up so bad the first time, actually I gave myself a lot of cool those scenes are still in the book. I still got to use most of them, and so those scenes provide the book some interest. Gives it some the book kind of has an interesting pace to it, because just when you start getting bored with some of the history, we're back into a fight between a couple, or some sort of violent thing happening or whatever, and you can so I can kind of use that to pace the book, so that it doesn't ever get too boring, and so I'm glad that I wrote it that way the first time, because I dug up a lot of stuff that was very usable in the end.
Yeah. That's the thing though that scares me, is is the work, is
Yeah.
the like you write it. And then like anything else, like it's one thing for me to rewrite a pilot that's like 40 pages or something, right? It's another thing for me to produce I've written bad books in the past. I've written terrible ones that are like, oh, this is not salvageable. It's not worth it to like do anything with.
Yeah.
I was just writing it for a lark anyway, because I was, this was like decades ago when I was like after college, I had a shitty day job, and I'm like, well, it takes me 2 hours to do the actual work, and I'm stuck here for 8 hours. Might as well like fuck around with the other 6. But that it seems to I guess the question I have is, are you someone who is not daunted by knowing the path in front of him, right? You're like, yeah, I'm going to have to write this like whatever, 200-page manuscript, and I know I'm going to have to rewrite it. Even if you had done it, had the narrative perfect the first time, you would still have to rewrite it, because that's the point of writing. Is that wasn't daunting to you?
Oh yeah, it was totally daunting. I mean, it's terrifying. I mean, but that's true. One thing I've learned is that fear exists whether I'm writing 100,000 word book or I'm writing like a 5,000 word feature, or now that I'm podcasting, like just writing a podcast script. It's like sitting down and starting is so hard. It's the hardest part because of all of that feeling, about that knowledge of knowing how hard this is going to be, and how how much time it's going to take, and how much blood will be left on the floor. It makes it hard to just start, and so that's where procrastination kicks in. So for a book, it's like all that times 10, and I definitely had no idea what I was getting myself into. I told myself like, oh, if I've written a 10,000 word feature before, then this is just 10 of those. And that's like so not that was such a dumb way to think about it, because that's not what it was like at all. And yeah, it was a hell of a lot of work, and it took years. And the other thing is, like, just living in this world of this book for so long kind of sucked. As much as I liked it for a few years, but like I got to a point where I was like, I'd like to think about something else other than like, mid-century Arkansas, politics and crime. I kind of was like, I needed breaks from the book along the way. So that may be part of why it took as long as it did too, is because sometimes I'd need to set it aside for a long period of time. So, part of writing in the age of digital media is there's a lot of instant gratification, right? Like if I write something for a magazine or a website or whatever, it's going to be up the next week, and that's great. And then I can move on to the next thing, and it's nice to be able to have it go up. With a book, it's like years, so I wasn't really used to that. And I think starting out in this process, I was very impatient. And I once I was done, I felt like I'm done. Now everybody should read it, and I can move on and write the next thing. But I wasn't done, and it was going to take a long time for anybody to get to read it. And so I really had to like develop some real patience throughout this process, and maybe I'm better off for it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I found creating at all is all about inertia and delusion, right? Deluding yourself that it's not going to be, that the road is not going to be as hard as it actually is.
Yeah.
And then breaking that inertia of nothingness into somethingness.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, once it's, I mean, that's like the first step, but then like also inviting in others to come in and edit and pick it apart and reshape it. That requires a tremendous amount of trust and I don't know, like it requires like letting go of your own ego, and I found all that tough too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, wait. So I want to ask too, we kind of talked before we started recording just about how we're feeling at the moment. I think I said good with a baseline of Weltschmerz.
And then you told me what that means.
Yeah, world weariness, right? I could be wrong, but I think that's what it is. And I wonder if has the postpartum depression kicked in yet? I know that you're in this kind of like promoting phase, so maybe it hasn't. Right. Or like, it seems like it would be greater for a book than anything else.
Yeah, and like the book was done over a year ago. Like the waiting for like just the literal book to be printed, like made and printed, it took so long. Like that, I had to really allow myself, once I realized the pages were locked, to forget about this thing and put it out of my mind and just stop thinking about it all. That's why I stopped writing the newsletter. I stopped, I mean, I just sort of moved on and went on to other projects because I was told that it could take a year, it could take a year and a half before it could be. It didn't even have a pub date, when they find so. And then when they gave me the date, and it was July 7th, and that was a long time ago too. And I was just like, God, that feels like so far away. So that was depressing. I mean, but there were moments all along the way I had dark moments all along the way. There were moments where I really thought this book was not going to come out, that I wasn't going
Really?
to finish. Yeah, where I was just like, I can't do this. It's not working. It sucks, or like I can't finish, or I don't have what I need. Just, and it's different when you can have those feelings when maybe you're writing on spec, but I was under contract, so I had to get it done, and yeah, I definitely had some moments where I was feeling very low and feeling, and also after years of this dragging on, I was like, God, this is taking so long. One of the things I really had to deal with, it's sort of a minor thing, is like I would tell people that I'm writing a book. I mean, think about it. In the first year of this, or the first 2 years of this, I interviewed so many people. I did all this research with all these people, and these people kind of let me into their lives to like share intimate details, to give me like their personal letters, their photos. They let me into their lives thinking I was writing a book. And then like years go by and nothing happens. They must have thought that I was just some sort of like, flim flam man that came through, like I was just lying to them. And so a lot of people in my life were like that, where for years, it was like the one question that everybody asked me: what's up with the book? When's the book coming out? And I'd have to tell them, I have no idea when it's coming out. I really
Yeah.
don't. Like,
I think I
there's-
emailed you at one point, or I
Uh-huh.
DM'd you or something. I was just like, I'm so excited. When's it coming out? And you're like, I don't know.
I had no idea. I really wish I wish I knew, and this went on for a long time, like where it would almost become a depressing question where people would say, what's up with the book? And I'd feel like sad about that instead of excited, because I'd have to tell them totally honestly, like, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's so out of my control. So much was out of my control, Even the question of, is the book done, was out of my control. I didn't get to decide that, right? An editor did. So like I wrote the book a few times thinking like, okay, here's the book, and then another person would read it and say, this is not the book, try again. And so
Huh.
that was always, a very humbling and difficult thing to go through over and over again. But honestly, I mean, I'm glad. I think the book is much better for it. That's why we work with brilliant editors, is so they can help us, especially as a first-time writer. I needed to learn how to write a book. But God, it was tough. I mean, I swear to God, when I sent that first draft off, as bad as it was, I really thought I'd hit a home run. So that first that took months for him to read it, and so after he finally read it, um, I was still in Arkansas at the time, because we lived in Arkansas for a year while I was working on the book. And we moved down there to like do research and to kind of take a book sabbatical. And I wrote the first draft and finished it, close to right towards the end of when we were there leaving. And then I finally get the call from him, that he wanted to talk about it. And I get on the phone, and it was like, I think his like first words were like, "This is a good start." And I just
Oh.
immediately I was so crestfallen, because I knew that I did not hit a home run.
Oh no. You got on
But
base
that's
though, right?
What's that?
You got on base.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that the direction I went in the beginning with this book served me well, because it gave me a lot of material that I could draw from. I mean, one thing my editor told me that I don't think was bullshit was, he said that like a lot of times with nonfiction, writers they work in the opposite direction, right? They like write the history, they write kind of the like all the names and dates and the chronological history, and then they turn that in, and then the editor says, this is great, now what you need to do is go find something colorful and dramatic, you know what I mean? And they go back, and then they hunt that stuff down later. So I just sort of put the cart before the horse, I guess. Or maybe I did it the right way and they did it the wrong way, I don't know. But all that work I did in that first draft, I was going to have to do anyway if I wanted to write a good book. So I'm glad that I got it out. I spent the time and energy trying to find the stories I did. I
Yeah.
mean, if I went back to do it all over again, I would have done everything a little differently, obviously, but that's normal, I think, for a first book. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I wouldn't have any idea how to. I have an idea of how to put something together based on things I've read, like based
yeah.
on books that I enjoy. I'm like, I guess I would do it like that, but you don't know until you start actually putting your fingers on the keyboard how it's actually going to come out, right?
Right, and that was a struggle too because like one thing you'll see when you read it is that like it's a bit of a unique kind of a book. I mean, it's a so the book there's three characters, right? There's this mobster from New York named Oni Madden who's fairly famous, and there's been a lot of written about him, and he owned the Cotton Club and he managed a lot of big time boxers and stuff, and he's sort of a known figure in the world in the annals of organized crime and New York history and everything. So he's one of the major characters. The other main character is a guy named Dane Harris, who was like a local guy in Arkansas, the son of a bootlegger who kind of grows up to become this big gambling boss. And then the third character is my grandmother. And the book weaves these three people's lives together over the course, or it tells each of these people's lives over the span of like 40 years. And eventually all their lives intersect right at the end in this one place. And so in that respect, the book was both a work of history and also family memoir. Like all the chapters about my grandmother were all just stories and stuff that I collected from family members and through letters and stuff like that. And so I was both writing kind of memoir but also history and at the same time. And in the beginning, I found it really hard to find titles that I could look to for inspiration because I couldn't find a lot of books that did this, right? Most books were either one or the other. They were either memoirs or they were history. There weren't a lot of memoirs that had lots of pages of endnotes, and there weren't a lot of works of history that relied heavily on family lore and stuff like that. And I remember asking the editor if he had any suggestions for books I could look at, and he was like, even if I had a suggestion, I wouldn't tell you. Because he's like, you'll just go read that book and you'll copy it. And he was like, you just have to figure it out. You just have to figure it out. And it was hard to figure it out. It took several drafts. But I think I was challenged by the fact that my book was unique. But hopefully that's what will make the book stand out and be interesting to people is that it is different. It does try to like weave together these two different types of storytelling.
I mean, here, let's talk a little bit about, I know you're probably... what's the word I'm looking for? Exhausted with Hot Springs, right? But like, just to talk a little bit about the city, how it was, and the city that you grew up in. Because reading your, the pieces that you write online and your newsletter, I didn't realize how into gambling you were personally.
Uh-huh.
And I'm assuming that is in some way related to Hot Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, I'm just curious, like, what was the Hot Springs that you grew up? I know this is a lot, but like, I guess the number of questions are, what was the history of it a little bit in brief? Mm-hmm. And then what was it like when you were growing up there? And then we can go from there.
Well, Hot Springs history and what the book kind of deals with is that Hot Springs from like the 1920s until the late 1960s was a big gambling town. I mean, it was Las Vegas before Las Vegas was Las Vegas, right? It's a national park. It was a spa town. It was a resort, like a kind of a European spa style resort, in Arkansas. And for a long time, it was a popular tourist destination for people all over America, all over the world, and they had illegal gambling. It was a big illegal gambling town. It was illegal, but it was permitted. It wasn't like backroom stuff, right? There were big casinos and stuff. The governor just like looked the other way. And this went on for a long time.
Wait, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
How does someone have the... Like, I'm trying to think of something that's illegal now. It would be like having like a cocaine den out in the open that everyone knew was a cocaine den. And you could go buy cocaine there and snort cocaine. And like Governor Newsom was just like, yeah, whatever. Like, that seems insane to me. How do you like just build a casino that everyone knows is there?
Well, because the federal government can only intervene if somebody's breaking a federal crime, which means something would have to cross state lines or something. There were no federal laws against gambling. There were only state laws against gambling. So the local government obviously wasn't going to punish any of this. In fact, they taxed it and treated it like it was legal. And the state government wasn't going to legalize it, but the governor was getting paid off, so he also wasn't going to enforce it. So for many decades, many governors of Arkansas all had the same line, which was, that's a local issue for the local courts to decide. If the local police or the local courts ask us to help, we will. And that's how it went on for a long time.
That's insane, right? Are we on the page that that's insane? On the same page?
Yeah, it was totally insane. So insane that, like, there were also, when Bobby Kennedy became Attorney General after John Kennedy got elected president, his whole thing was he wanted to, like, shut down the Teamsters Union, but, like, his whole war that he was waging against the Teamsters Union eventually brought him into this sort of gambling business and looking at the gambling business. And when they came to Hot Springs and saw what was going on there, they were there for like a day, and they had a press conference at their hotel the next day. They called a press conference the next day at their hotel to say, we can't believe what the fuck is going on down here. We have got to stop this. I mean, Hot Springs motivated the Wire Act. It motivated the Johnson Act. Like in 1961, I'm sorry I'm getting all into this history, but like in 1961, the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy wrote a bunch of laws and told Congress to pass them, and he wanted to pass them so that he would have the power to shut down Hot Springs. I mean, it was insane, and it actually spurred on a lot of, government action eventually. But even after they passed those laws, they kept it going. I talk about this in the book a lot. I don't need to get into it now, but like, they survived the 1961 Wire Act. They kept it going till 68. I mean, they really were. They had they had it wired pretty good in Arkansas, but it took Rockefeller getting elected governor of Arkansas to shut it down. But anyway, Hot Springs, that's what Hot Springs was for a long time. That's the Hot Springs my father grew up in, my grandmother grew up in, and like, I grew up in a different Hot Springs, right? Gambling was gone. The city was trying to reinvent itself. It wanted to still be a tourist destination, and a resort, but without the lure of gambling and without the money from gambling, it was difficult, right? So throughout the 1980s, the city tried a lot of things that failed. They built amusement parks and, they tried all kinds of rinky-dink, tourist attractions. And it really became a very kitschy kind of, tourist destination for a while, which I guess had its own charm. But
like city, Branson, Missouri?
Not like Branson, not on the level of Branson. Branson is like different kind of. Branson's maybe more camp than kitsch, right? Like Branson's like Las Vegas without any of the like sinfulness, right? It's like a Ned Flanders Las Vegas.
Yes.
No, I think it's more like roadside kitsch kind of stuff, right? Like raccoons that could dunk basketballs, or like or like a fake mermaid skeleton, or like that kind of shit, where it was like wax museums, more like Niagara Falls, if you've ever been to Niagara Falls. Hot Springs was a lot like that in the 80s. It was like they had loudspeakers out on the sidewalks downtown. It was all just like, come in and see this goofy, tourist trap attraction while you're here. It was really trying to be that kind of a tourist town for a while. And coupled with that was that the city had its economy, the rug was just ripped right out from under it. And there was a lot of flight out of the community. So it really got gutted. And I think I grew up as a kid in Hot Springs during its nadir, during its worst time. And, there was a lot of crime. When I was a kid, there were 7 strip clubs in this town, and there were only about 25,000 people that lived there, right? So it just changed a lot. And, now Hot Springs is completely different. I mean, Hot Springs has really found its sea legs, and it's really a cool place now, and it's a much more fun place to go and visit. But in the 80s, I think it was still struggling to figure out what it was. And it also, like I said, a lot of people left, but over time, more people have come back and sort of settled there. I mean, this is the way that things kind of ebb and flows, that places get so poor that then all the property becomes so cheap that then people come back because they're like, oh, wow, I could come here and, start a business or buy a house or whatever. So Hot Springs is definitely on the mend now. But when I was growing up there, it was really a shitty place.
Here's a dumb question, but maybe it leads to something more interesting. Do you think that growing up in a place that was struggling to find its identity did anything to you existentially?
Probably. I mean, probably. I think that, like, I don't know if I'd say existentially. I think that, like, I I've written about this before too. I think a lot of my my personal identity is, shaped by having grown up there. And it was a weird place. One of the things that was kind of weird that happened when I was a kid was that like Bill Clinton became president. And he went. He was from my town. I was going to his high school when he got elected. You know what I mean? Like I was a student at his high school, at his alma mater, and like he was like, I mean, people like my parents knew him. You know what I mean? Like he grew up there with all of them. Like it was a very strange thing where it was like we're this like little shitty, town, and then this guy from our town's the president now, and I don't know. That was kind of a big that was a big deal when that happened. But I do think that like. I took a lot for granted growing up there. I grew up around I grew up around gamblers. I grew up around people that like kind of lived around the world of the racetrack, or like bookmakers, or card games, and my grandmother, who I write about in the book, and then the man that she ends up marrying later at the very end of the book, who I was kind of raised with as a grandfather. They were carnies, they traveled with the carnival, and Hot Springs was also a big hub for the whole carnival business. And so they were like con artists, you know what I mean? Like they were in the carnival when the carnival was nothing more than just like a traveling, like knockoff casino, So like they ran a scam called Razzle with the carnival, and they traveled around the country ripping people off and stealing cars and dealing drugs and stuff. So they were pretty wild. They were pretty wild. And I grew up around all this shit. And I just think that, like, I didn't know that all this stuff was as weird as it was until I left, right? Until I was able to leave Hot Springs and go to larger cities and be around other people. And I still, to this day, am constantly surprised. I mean, this book, The Vapors, is really a product of me pitching completely different ideas to editors about books that I wanted to write, and then them asking me questions about Hot Springs, and me having conversations with them like the ones we're having right now, and them saying, why don't you just write about that? I just think that I, for so long, took for granted how unique and weird and kind of interesting the place I grew up was, because I hated it. As a kid, I wanted to get out of there as bad as I wanted to get the hell away from there, So then once I get out of there and I'm an adult and I'm living in New York City, people are so fascinated by Hot Springs. They want to hear more and more about it. And I think it took me a long time to realize that there was something cool about where I was from, because when I was a teenager, I thought it was the shittiest place in the world.
Wait, what? I mean, did you want to get out of there just because it was kind of, I don't know what the word is, decrepit, or it was like on the going downhill?
Maybe. I mean, I think I was also just an angsty teenager who in a small town, who longed to live in a big city and really believed that's where I was supposed to be. I think I was just like that stereotypical or more like cliche. I was like that cliche of a teenager, that I was like, oh, I need to be in New York City. So it was more like there was more parts of that than parts like, oh, my life actually sucks because I live here amid all this squalor. Because that's another thing I think that I was really I didn't fully appreciate either, how poor we were or how poor our community was either. I mean, I think I kind of understood. One of the things that's really stuck with me from my childhood and teenage years in Hot Springs was that, I went to a high school that suffered from white flight, where in the 1980s, where people started building houses and creating suburban communities outside of the city limits of our town so that they could build school districts, and all the rich kids could have their own school, which meant all the white kids could have their own school. And so by the time I graduated from high school, my high school had just shrunk so much in size, and it had become like like a majority, minority school. And there were two high schools right on the outskirts of my town that were big and bustling and rich, and the kids had everything, and they, And they would even like when they would sell houses in our town, they would have this thing on the real estate ads that say PSD, preferred school district. And so even as a kid, I understood that like we went to the shitty school, But now I think, having the perspective that I have now as an adult, I realize that even the nice schools in our town were still shitty schools. Like even the like rich people in my town were still not that rich, So I didn't fully appreciate how poor we were, because I didn't fully appreciate how poor all of Arkansas was until I got out of Arkansas. And I think that's probably true for everybody there. And a lot of people that are still there probably don't even get it. You know, there's still a lot of people there that don't understand the depths of it. But yeah, I think that I wouldn't say that I was like fleeing a dangerous situation by getting out of Arkansas. I just think that I wanted to get out of a small town. But having said all that, Hot Springs back then was, and this is another thing, I've written about this in my newsletter quite a bit. Hot Springs back then was a fairly violent place, and you know, I think I was within close proximity to a lot of really weird shit that again I did not totally get until I was older and I got married to my wife, and I was able to kind of see my family and my hometown through her eyes and realize that like it's not normal to be like whatever. It's not normal to like have gone to 8 funerals by the time you graduate from high school, or it's not, I shouldn't say it's not normal, but it's not everybody's experience, right? And it's like, you know, some of the stories that I would tell would just sort of like blow her and her family's wig back in a way that I think was surprising to me. And I used to think that's just because her and her family might have been a little bit sheltered. But over time, I've realized that no, it's actually that I grew up in a very weird place. Where,
like what? Is there one that you're comfortable sharing?
Well, I think like I think one of my first newsletters that I wrote when I first started doing the newsletter was a story about seeing a guy get shot in the face right in front of me, you know? And so like, you know, just like being around crime and violence from a very young age, you know? And I mean, I was just telling a story just the other day. Like, just the other day, I was telling a story about a kid. I was on the phone with my sister. She still lives there. And I was on the phone with her, and we were talking about something. Her and her daughter moved into the house that I grew up in. It's a little house that my grandfather built in, like, the 30s. And she was able to get it and move into it, and she was very excited about it. She's telling me about the old neighborhood. And I asked her about this kid from our old neighborhood, and she was like, oh, yeah, he's dead. Which honestly didn't surprise me because, like, you know, but I then was telling my wife about this, and I told her a story about how I went back and to visit my mom and dad, like when I was in college, I think, or maybe right after I got out of college, I went back to visit them, and I was out for a run one evening, and I decided I would run through our old neighborhood. And while I'm running through the old neighborhood, this guy who I grew up with in that neighborhood, him and another guy jumped me, and like with a gun, and they tried to rob me, and then he recognized me, and he was like, "Oh, what's up, man? What are you doing here?" And we laughed about it, and we told some stories or whatever, and he like apologized for trying to roll me, and then like, you know, we chatted for a bit, and then I left, and I told my wife that story, and she was like, "You had somebody try to rob you with like a gun?" And I was like, "That's not even the first time that's happened to me, you know?" So like, this is the thing that I'm saying, like, these stories sometimes would like, I sometimes see in the other people's surprise that these stories are kind of crazy, and I don't know, I don't realize that they are, because it's just sort of, if you grew up where I grew up around the people I did, this is like normal shit. Like, I told a story on Twitter one night about hiding this kid in my house from the police who had like who had just like robbed a cab stand, and the story blew up, and people still talk to me about it all the time. They're like, you know, I cannot believe you know, that story's true, and they always ask me millions of questions about it. It was like my finest moment on Twitter maybe was the night that I decided to tell the story about hiding the armed robber from the police in my house. But I don't know. That's just the kind of stuff that went on around there, and I think it's a combination of both that town at the time and maybe just the kind of people that we grew up around and ran with, you know, in our family. But so that's what I mean in a nutshell, is like, you know, being around violence and crime and stuff that's sort of like, you know, edgy, but being a kid and being around that stuff is, you know, very weird, I guess.
Well, I mean, how does it shape you as a person, right? I mean, through all of this, I mean, I don't know how you were feeling in these different scenarios, but like, it comes off that you were a little bit fearless, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'd call myself fearless. It's weird, right? Like, if I'm there, and when I was there, maybe I was fearless because I was comfortable there. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not the kind of person who's, well, I don't know. I was a union organizer for like 15 years, right? And like, I don't know, maybe some of maybe some of this that we're talking about now helped me in that job, because I do remember that one of the tensions that a lot of, when I started organizing, there were a lot of like kind of younger people coming out of college and getting into the labor movement as organizers, and this was always a tension. Sometimes was when you're organizing low wage workers, and especially when you're doing it in big cities, you have to go into some rough neighborhoods. I mean, the job of a union organizer is to go door to door and knock on people's doors and talk to them, and some organizers were scared to do it. They were scared to do it. I mean, some of them were scared to do it even in like, not in like really, in urban areas or whatever. They could be out in the middle of the country and they'd be scared to do it. But we did legitimately have to go sometimes into some like places where we didn't know anybody. We were definitely outsiders, and it was a little sketchy. And I never had any real problem with it. I mean, I always would sort of, I don't know, give shit to the people who were, which wasn't cool of me, but I was in my 20s or whatever, so I was a asshole. But I definitely remember back then that I was probably more fearless back then than I am today, where I would go anywhere and I'd knock on anybody's door, I'd talk to anybody, and I saw some crazy shit back then too, like I saw all kinds of wild shit when I was a union organizer, knocking on doors in the middle of Newark or or I'd be in the middle like East New York, or I mean, even some of the worst shit was when I was in the middle of, I remember being chased out of somebody's yard with a gun in like Grand Rapids, Michigan, so so that that fearlessness may have served me well in that job, but today I'm 42 years old and I don't think of myself as fearless today at all. I think of myself as a gigantic coward now. So I think as I get older, a lot of that stuff is, and I don't live it, and I live in Nyack, New York now. You know what I mean? So like, I have 3 little kids. Like, I think my life has taken me to a different place where I don't think that there's any reason for me to be fearless or brave. You know what I mean?
I wonder if that, like, because when I talk to anyone on the show who didn't come from money or come from a family that had connections into creative industries.
Uh-huh.
It's always it took me forever to really get the guts up to go and pursue comedy. Right. I was scared because it's like I had nothing to fall back on, and if I failed at it, that's just it. Right. I go the rest of my life having failed at this thing that I really wanted to do, and then I have to figure out something else, and I'll be starting from scratch, right? I can't just like go back to my family's Stamford mansion or whatever. Greenwich, right? Greenwich is the real wealthy area. And I wonder if like that fearlessness allowed you to pursue this in some way.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I wonder though whether or not even those like rich people that you're talking about feel some of the same fear of failure. It's just that the consequences are different for them, right? I mean, like for them, it's like, yeah, they fail, but they don't fall on their ass economically, but they still fall on their ass. Like there is a fear of failure because I think they want to succeed so that they can be seen as geniuses or whatever. And then when they fail, so I guess it's like their peers or whatever. So there is still that fear.
But they still get to keep going, right?
Yes,
like, what's his
face? They can try
face?
Forever. Yes.
Max Landis. Is that his name? That like creep?
Uh-huh.
Right? Everything he does sucks, but he still gets to keep going.
And Max is John Landis' son, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. You're right. That you, in some ways, if you've got enough money and connections, you don't ever fail. You just get to keep going. It doesn't matter that nothing that you do is any good. You get to keep living this life forever because you'll do it for free. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. I don't honestly have no fucking idea why I'm here doing this. I don't know why I'm writing. I don't know why I went in this direction. I mean, there was a time in my life when I was younger where I really wanted to be a writer, like in high school. Somewhere along the way, like when I was in college, I became I got really into politics and became a bit of an activist, and I completely went in a different direction. And at that point, I kind of even stopped thinking about writing as something I might want to do. It never seemed like anything realistic, but definitely when I was when I was younger, like in high school, I liked to read. I wanted to be a writer. It was like a dream I had, but I'd say through most of my 20s, I didn't think about that shit at all. I had completely abandon any dream I had to like live a creative life or an art life, become an artist. I was an organizer. I was like, my dream was to see a revolution in the United States, and I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Like I didn't, I didn't ever entertain this stuff. So I don't know. I think that like me coming to this place that I'm at now was more like a function of a bunch of kind of personal tragedies that happened in my life that I think pushed me away from what the path I was on, and writing just became a thing that I don't know. It became a thing that kind of one thing happened after another, and I just kept. It opened up a path, and I just kept following it. I don't know.
Mm.
That's probably too vague, but like my dad died in 2009. So like 2009, I had like I was working for a union. The union went through this like civil war where it like completely split the union in half and everybody hated each other. It was like this, this big power struggle. And then right as that was happening, my dad got sick. So like I quit my job, I went back to take care of my dad. Like my dog died. My dad died. My sister went to prison. Like all this shit was happening in 2009 where it just felt like nothing good was happening. One thing after the next was just terrible. And like, and then my wife got pregnant. We just said, I quit my job. I stopped organizing, and we moved back to the city, and I started writing. I don't know. I started writing. I started doing like comedy. I think I wrote about this once before too. Like I started doing comedy because a therapist suggested it to me. I might have talked to you about this before, but
No, I don't think we did.
yeah, I was in therapy because of, everything that was going on in my life. That's when I started doing therapy because I just felt like I was snake bit. And the first therapist I had was so bad, dude. He was so bad. He had like a little Zen rock garden, and he'd sit like crisscross applesauce in his chair, without any shoes on. And
Is this Upper West Side?
No, this was in Denver, Colorado.
Oh.
Yeah, this is before we moved back to New York. My wife and I, we moved out to Denver for a brief moment thinking we were going to live out there. She took a job out there, and we weren't even there. I don't even know how long we were there. We just was like, this was a mistake, and we moved back to New York. So that's what I said before we moved back to New York. But anyway, I started therapy out there. I don't think I was happy living out there, and everything was in my life was kind of like making me sad. So I go to see this guy, and he's like, you should try comedy, maybe that'll help bring some like, that brings some like joy into your life. It was like the worst advice anybody's ever given me. I mean, I started going to open mics in Denver, and it was like, these people there's no joy here. These are the most miserable pieces of shit I've ever met in my life. But that's why I sort of wandered into this sort of strange world of comedy, was because at the advice of this guy who was a terrible therapist. But I got hooked on it all the same, you know what I mean? I think because I was miserable, and then everybody else was miserable, it was like, oh, okay, well, even though this doesn't make me any happier, this is clearly where I'm supposed to be.
This is like a real life version of that Pagliacci joke.
What's the Pagliacci joke?
A guy goes to the doctor. He's like, I feel miserable. I just feel like ending everything. And the doctor goes, well, you know what you got to do? There's a great clown performing tonight. He makes everyone laugh. Everyone comes out of there. You got to go see Pagliacci. And then the guy goes, but doctor, I am Pagliacci. It's not a joke. It's like that's like a street joke from like 1917 or something, when people would go see clowns. But that's that thing. Like you were living that like you were living that for real.
Yeah, and it sucked. I mean, it was like, it was probably not. I mean, look, getting into that world helped me in a lot of ways. It was like finding a community of other people who also like wanted to like write and make things or be, basically artists was cool, because it like, it inspired me. It made me realize that like, I mean, sort of to your point before about like trying and failing. I don't think that I didn't have the courage to try this stuff because of any like, ego that I was going to succeed or that I was great at it. I really had the courage to do it because I met a lot of people and surrounded myself with people who were also trying, you know what I mean? And I think that like that motivated me more than anything else, was realizing like we could do this, right? Like other people are doing it, we're doing it. Like,
Right.
so it was just sort of like finding a group of friends who motivated me, and and we'd motivate each other in turn. And I think that's true for you too. And I think that like that more than anything propelled me forward to keep trying, and to think that like maybe I could, maybe I could write something that people would want to read.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So you had to have this kind of like rupture in your life, though,
Yeah.
to force you to follow what was originally
Yeah.
the thing you wanted to do anyway.
Yeah. It's totally weird when I look back on it. It's
No,
so
because
weird.
I mean, the same thing happened to me. I got kicked out of grad school, right? I thought I was doing what my parents wanted me to do, kind of. I was trying to find some kind of happy medium, right? I was going to be a philosophy professor,
Yep.
and it was obvious I didn't really want to be doing that. I wanted to be writing comedy. I wanted to be performing or whatever, doing something, right?
Yeah.
And it took that happening for me to finally just go do it. Because otherwise I would have just gone on that path. I would have become a philosophy professor.
Yep.
And like it would have been a fine life. I wouldn't have been bad, but it wouldn't have been the thing I really wanted.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true. Although the only difference is that I'm not 100% sure that this life that I have now is the one that I really wanted. That I'm living my true life now, and that when those years that I was organizing, that was somehow that I was on the wrong path. I don't know that that's
Really?
true. Yeah, I just think that like the universe delivered me here. I don't know that I ended up in the right or wrong place, right? Like I didn't feel unhappy with the work that I was doing before. In fact, I was quite proud of myself. I felt like I was, I felt like I was doing good work, and it made me feel full. I mean, up until the point that I had to do shitty work because of the sort of, whatever, the schism that happened within the union I was working for at that particular time. But no, overall, the work I was doing, I felt fulfilled by. And it wasn't like I was unhappy with that work. It was just that in that particular moment, there was just these, it was circumstantial, right? Like all these things happened so quickly in a row that I had to quit and I had to like leave. And then I could have gone back to do it again. My wife still does this work, but like, I could have gone back into that world. But also we started having children, and I just saw this as an opportunity to like do something else that was going to sort of be different for me psychologically. It was going to be different for me physically. It was going to allow me to be present more at home. I don't know, like, and now that I'm doing it, I do feel fulfilled by the work that I'm doing now as well. But I don't know. I think about this a lot. I do, and I talk about this in therapy. I talk about this with my wife. I don't know whether or not this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Huh.
I feel a lot of guilt. I feel a lot of personal guilt about having left the labor movement, and
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
The
know
world-
what you're
the world did not need, another white man, publishing books. The world did not need that. But the world does need a lot more organizers. And so I do feel a lot of personal guilt and shame that like that I dipped out and now I'm doing this, and it's just like so cliche, so yeah, that's why I hesitate
Yeah.
to say that I hesitate to say that that these things in my life delivered me to the right path. I don't know that I'm on the right path. I'm just on
Huh.
this path.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm always under the assumption that I don't know why. For someone that believes, let me just restate it like this. I don't believe that we're static beings. I don't know. That's not the noun I wanted, but like humans aren't static, right? We are dialectical creatures that change, and our wants and desires and our existential constitution mutates over time. So I don't know why I thought that like, well, if you have this desire in childhood, obviously my own story is that going to New York to do comedy, to pursue it, did fulfill me and relaxed my body. Like I could feel the tension that I had held in my body for decades. I felt it dissipate in a way that like I just assumed that happens for other people. If you had this desire that you've had since you were young, and you're like, I can't do this. It's not going to happen for me. It's an impossible dream. Or for me, it wasn't even something I realized was a thing I could do. I didn't think that was, I didn't even understand what a comedy writer was really. I didn't grow up around anyone that did that or went to pursue that. Obviously someone had to write things, but it was like, like when you talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I saw the end credits for SNL. I didn't realize there were writers. I thought the actors were making it all up. I knew in some neuron somewhere that there were writers, but it just didn't, there was no connection made with the fact that I could do something like that then. Right. So moving to New York, it was all the stuff, a realization that my body relaxed. Things just felt easier doing that. But I don't know. I wonder if there is, just even though we are these dynamic creatures, I wonder if there is some kind of narrative arc in our lives where you do have this childhood desire that then is fulfilled in adulthood in some way. I'll ask specifically about you. Was there any loosening of yourself when you finally moved to New York?
Yeah. I mean, I felt great about it. I felt great about and I feel great about, having published this book. I think that I feel I feel a lot of personal pride, a real sense of accomplishment that I did it. So I'm not trying to act all like, oh, I did all this and life still sucks. It's more like, I did this. Most of what I said was really just in reaction to this idea that this is who this is who I'm really supposed to be, because I'm not sure that I've reckoned with that completely. But when we came back to New York, there was a lot of loosening in that, but also it was coupled with us having a kid. My wife is from here, all of her family's here, so being around her family, and then me kind of pursuing the idea of writing and creative work. I enjoyed it. I met a lot of people that became friends. Selfishly, I liked having a life now where I didn't have to worry about. Look, the thing about being an organizer is that that life is one that is fraught with conflict. I mean, it's by necessity, it's fraught with conflict. That's what you do. If you're a union organizer, your job is to go meet people you've never met before and then convince them to get into a big fight with their boss. And then you're on, you know what I mean? And you're going to do it with them. So all I would do day in and day out is go get in fights, you know what I mean? And stir up shit and be in the middle of conflict and turmoil and, drama, and the stakes were very high. So that's stressful, man. That stuff wears you down, and it's exciting and thrilling sometimes, but it did a number on me. So I definitely felt we came back to New York and I stopped doing that kind of work. I felt the loosening of wow, it's nice to not have to carry this around with me all the time, Mm-hmm. But I feel guilty about that because that's also the easy way out, because it's not like that work doesn't still exist, and people don't still have to do that. It's just that I don't have to anymore, and I feel bad about that.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a thing. If you have any kind of leftist political inclinations, it's something you have to kind of reckon with. And I'm part of DSA, and I work on the Immigration Justice Committee, and I do a lot of stuff there, but it's in the margins, right? Mm-hmm. And it's, my creative work comes first mostly, and mm-hmm. Naomi comes first, and activist work is third, I guess, or so in that hierarchy. Well, sorry, go on.
No, I wouldn't. I think you should give yourself a lot more credit than that. I think that it's important to remember that when I was a union organizer, I was paid to do it, right? It was my full-time job. So what you're talking about doing, you do free and for nothing. And I think that's important. I don't think that it's worth noting that people who are activists and that have normal lives and normal jobs, and they still make time for organizing and activism, should be commended. And more so than me, somebody who was paid a salary to do that work full time. I mean, it took its toll on me psychologically, sure, and it was hard work, and it takes certain kinds of people to do that. But I don't think that I should get too much credit because, I got paid to do it.
Yeah, no, but you got paid to do something you believed in. It wasn't like you were just it wasn't like you were some Reaganite who was unions are terrible. Sure. But I'm getting paid to organize, so I'll do it. You believe in, I mean, you were the first person to really convince me that writing was labor, that
Mm-hmm.
you know, writing comedy was, even though I love doing it, it's labor and
Yeah.
I should get a fair wage. I mean, it's something like I've become very militant about it, especially moving out to Los Angeles and seeing just how easily it is to be exploited and how often I am exploited for my labor. But the fact that I see it as labor now and not just like, well, I love to do it, so it's okay that I'm being exploited by these large corporations. It's
Right.
like, no, I love doing it, and you should pay me a fair wage if you are going to hire me to do something.
Right. No, it's amazing. I mean, just in like the last 10 years, I feel like I've seen, I don't know, maybe just in the last 5 years, I've seen such a sea change among people that I know, that you and I know, that kind of work in, you know, whatever, the entertainment business, and how their attitudes about this have shifted so radically in the last 5 years in a good way. I mean, I remember having conversations like the ones that you and I are talking about, you know, when I first started hanging around people in comedy in New York, and folks just being completely like, you know, just looking at me like I had two heads. I mean, people who today that I know are like super radical and like, you know, are like organizing unions and stuff. Because when I came to New York, I went to work for the Writers Guild, right? And so that was kind of like my stepping stone out of the labor movement. Was like my stepping stone out was like I went to work for the labor union that represented writers, right? And then like
Mhm.
I became like a full-time writer. But in that job, I met met and worked with a lot of professional writers and tried to organize people around taking on these companies that hire people to write, whether it's comedy or any other kind of like television or entertainment. And there was so much fear, and there was so much of a sense of like, oh, it's just a privilege to even get to do this at all, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And I remember talking to people back then who not only were like kind of nervous and skittish about organizing or fighting or taking on their employer as a boss or whatever, and had this kind of whole attitude about they're not our bosses, you know, they're writers too, to like people who were just straight up anti-union and stuff, and would talk to me about how like SAG-AFTRA like makes it so hard to make things, and you know, they just had all these like anti-union kind of lines. Some of those same people today are like militant, hardcore, you know, trade unionists and like socialists, or whatever. And that's just 5 years. In 5 years, I feel like so many people in the entertainment business have become really radicalized, and I think that's very cool, and I think that it bodes well for the future of our ability to make a living, you know, as writers and creative people, because what's been hurting us for so long is that we were willing to take it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. If you told me the number of people that I see on that I've been friends with for about a decade now, that started at UCB with, that are now like militant socialists, or like, just like, you know, we grew up in this age, we came up in this age of comedy where there was a lot of irony. And those same ironic comedians are now like part of DSA and are really, you know, are doing a lot of the work, of the actual capital W work. And it kind of blows my mind to see that like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they were, you know, just apolitical at best.
When I first started writing, you know, at UCB, I remember having conversations with people about this question about why are we not paid, and which, you know, whether or not that was sort of fundamentally exploitive, and, you know, like, why are we expected to pay for this and that? And like, I remember having some of these kind of hushed conversations with people back then. And, you know, my attitude, I was a lot older than a lot of people that I wrote with and worked with back then, and I just kind of didn't give a shit, right? So I was more like, who cares, you know? But people who were really in the throes of like, this is it, I'm going to make it, I'm going to become famous, like, were really scared to even talk about that shit. But like, it's funny because like, back then it was like impossible to get a large group of people to even really talk seriously about questioning these things and asking even our friends who were in management to consider like giving people, you know, letting people stop, you know, stop asking us to pay for things. Those conversations were so hard to have, let alone, you know, talking about the sort of broader questions, the bigger questions. And now it's like some of those same people. I mean, back then we had to have theater meetings where we'd get dressed down by Matt Besser or whatever, because people weren't defending the theater on social media adequately enough or whatever. Like that's how fucked it was back then. And now it's like some of those same people who I remember like being unwilling to even speak to me in anything more than an annoyed whisper about some of this stuff, who literally just want to burn the place to the ground. Like that's how much it's changed. That whole scene and that situation changed. And some of that's just because I think the theater, they took till they couldn't take no more, and I think people just got to where I think I think some folks were sort of maybe blinded by this idea of their own personal stake in it all and their own personal careers. Or some people, maybe I'm just being speculative here, but we're not talking about specific people, so it's okay. But I think all that was gone after a while. People realized like, oh yeah, nothing's going to happen. This thing is not my ticket to anything. Like, we are all just like propping each other up, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like my feeling about that and about the USP question in general was like, there's something quite beautiful about us propping all each other up. And before, when I was talking about, other friends who were artists was part of what motivated me and propelled me forward. I mean,
yeah,
there's something great about those things. What sucked was that when there's this like multi-million-dollar business on top of it, who's also asking you to pay them, like that's when I was like, we don't need that, guys. We can do all this without that. So I think it took a while for people to get to the place where they were willing to say, yeah, that's right, I can do all this and not be ripped off in the process.
I wrote a couple things down because I wanted to make sure we hit them still before we end. But like, I want to go back a little bit to like your dreams as a child, because something I've been thinking about lately and talking about in therapy is what happens when the culture you live in undergoes a paradigm shift, and you were built for the earlier paradigm, but you still have to live out the rest of your life in this new paradigm.
Yeah. And
I can't do it. I liken it to like something like, I grew up, both of my parents worked, and, they weren't good chefs in the first place. They weren't really good at cooking. And so dinners were just kind of like, not every dinner was this, but like a lot of them were just like buttered noodles and some boiled broccoli and Weaver chicken nuggets or something like that, right? A lot of meals were in that realm, or a meatloaf my mom would make. And my palate developed around that stuff. And now that I have learned that there's other cuisine, it took me years to reform my palate to like whatever, Indian food, Thai food, all these other types of cuisines that have all these other different types of flavors. And it took me a while to do that. It's the same thing with your like dreams or your existential desires when you're younger. And we have kind of gone in the last, I think of 2000, the crash in 2008 as this big rupture in our culture, where it really, I had already been reading a lot of leftist stuff like Chomsky and Zinn and all those kind of people for about 7 or 8 years before that. But 2008 is what radicalized me, right? Seeing that there would never be any justice for wealthy elites. And everything's kind of gotten a lot worse in the last 12 years. And speaking to your guilt about, the world needs more organizers, that's a deep guilt in me as well. Because it's true, the world does need more organizers, but what do you do when your dreams are not to organize people? When you want to do that work and you want to help out, but that's not what I want to do for a living.
Sure. Well, I think in some ways we've already kind of answered that, which is that we treat the work that we are doing as labor and we organize with other people who are doing it, right? I mean, because that's what we all should be doing. Like everybody in America should be figuring out how they can build more power among the people that are in the same place that they're in, whether it's the community they live in, the place that they work. All of us have to build power at the level that we're at in the place that we're at.
I said sure. I said sure as if it was pat. I don't think until you just kind of like formulated it like you just did right there, that it was actually all the pieces had been put in place for me. But that did, I'm like, oh, you're right. everyone should be organizing wherever they are. Everything we do should have those two things: your work or your existential desires and your political and labor beliefs should be intertwined like DNA.
Right, and like that's I think that's, if we're successful at that, that's when we'll actually see things change, instead of like all of us thinking that we're like, there's no reason to have any like, organizing FOMO, you know what I mean? Thinking that somebody else somewhere else is like doing all the important work and we're missing out on it. I mean, the truth is that like for like service workers or industrial workers or healthcare workers or anybody else in this economy who are trying to organize and build some power, they are only helped by creative workers doing the same thing. They're only aided in that. And I'd even go further to say, if we don't, as creative workers, organize, we are hurting them, right? Mm-hmm. Because the way we show solidarity to all the other workers in this economy isn't by like sending them money or like, boycotting the businesses when they ask us to boycott them or whatever. The way we show them solidarity is by doing the exact same thing in our little segment or neck of the woods, in our part of the economy, and organizing as well, and like taking on our employers. Because at the top of the fucking pyramid, it's all the same employers.
Yeah,
it's the same people at the top. So like I think that like I don't worry so much anymore about like I don't worry so much anymore that like I'm not as good of a leftist anymore, because I'm not like traveling around the country going to like the poorest fucking parts of America to help people like organize against their bosses. Because I feel like I'm still participating in that fight. As long as what I'm doing today to make money, I am also engaging and working with other people who are making money this way to like build some power vis-a-vis the people that are paying us and exploiting us or whatever. And that's what I think the work is.
Well, then why are you personally unsure at some level that this is what you are supposed to do, or what? Not supposed to. I don't believe in fate, but I mean, like, what internally, that it feels right to be a writer or to call yourself a writer.
Why am I unsure that it feels? No, I think I'm a writer. I don't feel unsure that it's right to call myself a writer. I mean, I think that I am, in fact, a writer. You know what I mean? And like proof, I think indeed, and like word and deed or whatever. Like I'm saying that what I was saying before is that I'm not. I don't believe that like I am in my soul that I was a writer all along, and that all those years that I spent as an organizer was like me just like being off the path that I was supposed to be on. That's what I was trying to convey before. I mean, I think that like how should I say this? The guilt that I feel is that I think that I was good at being an organizer. Maybe I wasn't, but I thought that I was. I thought I was good at it. And I thought that I had the capacity to do it, and I walked away from it, right? And I think that my reasons for walking away were maybe kind of selfish, and I feel some guilt about that. I think that I'm still, trying as much as I can to keep a foot in that world, and also to exercise that muscle that I have of exercise that organizing muscle that I may still have for whatever it's still worth. To participate in the labor movement and in organizing other writers and artists, but the guilt won't ever go away. I mean, it's hard for me to explain, because I think for so many years I lived in this culture and in this world where a lot of what motivated us too was this real kind of machismo about the whole work too. I'm married to somebody who still does it, right? And I see it in her. And like sometimes now that I'm on the outside looking in, I'm very critical of that kind of machismo and that kind of attitude. And I give her some shit about it sometimes. But like some of that's still with me too, where it's like I just feel like I quit. I feel like I feel like I gave up, and I made the easy choice to walk away from it and do something else. It's not to say that my life's been easier in some ways because I walked away. In some ways, it's been harder. But all the same, I think what I said before is true. The world doesn't have enough organizers, We need more. The world has a lot of fucking books, And so, I don't know. I think what I'm doing today is maybe it's more about me and less about, we, and that's maybe why I feel guilty.
Yeah. So it's more of like that you just struggle with all these feelings than that you are. I don't think anyone's on us. I don't think we're on paths, right? I think we are.
Uh-huh.
When I envision humans and their lives, I think of like a series of vectors. I think of a person as some kind of like basic boundary of desires and feelings and all that kind of like Freudian shit, right?
Yeah.
And there's a boundary around it, right? There's certain tendencies people will do or not do based on their personalities. And then vectors push those boundaries in different ways, or push the whole mass of who you are in different ways. And so I don't think there's ever a path that's like dictated by like some kind of, I don't know, what's that evolutionary theory that like from like the 1800s where like you have the seed and then the seed tells the destiny of the animal, right? I don't think I don't think it's like that where everything is in embryo in your life. But I do think there are certain desires that you have when you're young. And if you really believe those desires, if those are really about like, this is what I want to do and I have a passion for it.
Yeah.
Not doing that thing it creates anxiety and frustration and other kinds of feelings like that in you that are then dispersed when you come back to it. And that's what I meant. I don't mean that like you had a destiny. I just mean that you had this deep desire that was finally fulfilled.
Yeah, obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but I mean that's probably true. I mean, I ended up where I ended up, and I can't help but think that like I ended up here because there was something inside of me that was pushing me to this place from when I was young, for sure. I also think that if certain things hadn't happened in my life when they happened in that year, I would not have ended up here at all. When I think about like this, like immediately, what immediately kind of got me into writing. I mean, I started out writing for like a basketball blog, and like for fun. And then I was like doing this column for McSweeney's for free, for fun. But then it's like I'm getting contacted by like agents and, publications were pitching me, asking me to write them. So it all kind of happened in a way that like, I really felt like these doors were opening. I wasn't looking to open them. And I hate to say that because I know some people, it doesn't happen like that for them, but, and it didn't all happen for me like that either. It's just in the very beginning, I went from thinking about writing as just something I was kind of doing in a very casual, kind of like as a hobby, to thinking about it as something that I could do with my life. And that happened very fast, and it only happened because people contacted me and said, we'll pay you to do this. You know what I mean? So like when I think about that, that's why I think it all feels so random. It all feels so strangely random. It doesn't feel to me like some burning desire that I had that I sought out for. But I take your point, and I do think that like whether or not I felt like there was a burning desire in me to do it doesn't mean that there wasn't one, or that I wasn't, my whole life itching to like, write. Honestly, I think that like the reason that I think it, look, if I'm any good at writing at all, I really think it's because I grew up in a Southern family of storytellers where like telling stories was a bit of a capital. You know what I mean? It was like a skill you developed in order to be able to be heard at the dinner table or whatever, and to make people laugh and that kind of thing. And I think that like it's more of a cultural thing with me than it is a learned thing, right? Like I didn't study it in school. I'm not well read. You know what I mean? I mean, compared to a lot of people, I'm not well read, but like I really do think that like if I'm any good at this at all, it's more because of like who I am, and like where I can than anything that I like tried to study or like as a discipline, and I now am studying as a discipline. I'm now trying to get better at it by studying it, reading other writers, thinking more deliberately about my writing or whatever. But I think I just kind of fell into this because people were like, you have some interesting stories. Can you tell me, will you write them down for us? And, one thing kind of leads to another. So.
Yeah. So again, like all the skills were there in embryo. They didn't dictate your destiny, right? But being, the fact that this was currency, that you came from a weird town, weird in comparison to the rest of America, maybe, and that telling stories was this currency, like you said, it was capital in your family.
Yeah.
It's all the pieces are there. You could not have done this, right? You could have very well, like you said, it's very what's the word I'm looking for? It was coincidental that these doors opened for you at this certain time, but it wasn't like you were ill prepared, right? Those doors wouldn't have opened if you hadn't been a good writer. You hadn't been a good writer, and you were a good writer because of these embryonic things in your life,
right? Right, and I think that I also probably learned a lot as an organizer, since so much of that job is just listening to people tell you their life story. I'm sure that helped a lot too. But I'm sure that this thing that I'm doing now has an endpoint to it as well. I mean, it's weird, but having had a career for 15 years and then completely changing careers makes me feel like nothing's permanent. This may be the only book I ever write, and if you want to talk to me for the podcast in 10 years, it'd be interesting to see whether I've completely shifted gears again and I've decided to, open up a board game cafe or teach chess or something.
You could. I mean, look, we got on too long. I don't want to keep you anymore. I mean, I wanted to talk a lot about gambling because I was curious about that because you write about that a lot, but we'll save that for another time.
I could join the Four Timers Club.
Yeah. Dave, thank you so much for talking to me again on the show. I love your writing, and I'm just happy to help spread the gospel.
I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I love the show. I love everything you guys do too. It's cool to be on your show again.
Oh, thank you. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.